It's the middle of the night. You wake up for no reason at all. The room is completely dark, and everything in it is exactly where you left it. Your clothes, your door, the chair, nothing has moved, nothing is wrong, and yet your heart is going faster than it should. And some quiet part of your brain is absolutely convinced that you are being watched. You know it's ridiculous. You are a fully grown adult in a locked building in a city with streetlights and police and door chains. There is nothing in your room. There has never been anything in your room. But knowing that doesn't help, because the part of your brain that's scared right now isn't the part that reads. It's older than that. It's older than language, older than farming, older than our species. Almost every human being on Earth is born afraid of the dark. Not taught, born. Children in cities and children in villages. Children who have never seen a horror film and children who have all start fearing the dark at roughly the same age, and mostly get over it at roughly the same age. That is not a coincidence, and it is not a personality flaw. It's a piece of inherited equipment. So where did it come from? Why would evolution build an animal that panics in the absence of light? And here's the stranger question. Why hasn't it gone away? Because we solved darkness. We solved it completely. So why, at 3 in the morning, does none of that seem to matter? Let's start by fixing the question, because the phrase, fear of the dark, is doing something sneaky. Darkness cannot hurt you. It isn't a substance. It isn't cold. It isn't sharp. It doesn't carry disease. It is simply the absence of photons hitting your eyes. If you were dropped into a completely dark room and given a genuine guarantee that the room was empty, most people would be fine. Bored, maybe. Not terrified. What actually frightens you is not the dark. It's what the dark could be hiding. Fear of the dark is fear of the unknown, wearing a costume. And you can watch this happen in your own head. In the dark, your brain doesn't stop building a picture of the world. It just loses its best source of information and starts guessing. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust against the window, every shape in the corner gets handed to a system that has to make a call with almost no data. And that system has a very old rule. When you're not sure, assume the worst. Psychologists have tested this directly. Put people in a dark room and play them ambiguous sounds, and they consistently rate those sounds as more threatening than the exact same sounds played in a lit room. Their startle reflex gets stronger. Their bodies brace harder. Same sound, same room, different lighting, and a completely different animal reacting, which tells you the fear isn't about information, it's about the loss of it. To understand why losing that information terrifies us, you have to understand what we used to be. We like to think of early humans as hunters, spears, mammoths, cave paintings of the hunt, and that's true, eventually. But for most of the story, our ancestors were not primarily the ones doing the hunting. They were on the menu. In 1924, in a limestone quarry in South Africa, workers pulled out a fossilized skull. It belonged to a child, roughly 3 years old, who died somewhere around 2.5 million years ago. We call it the Taung child, and it's one of the most famous fossils ever found because it helped prove that our family tree began in Africa. But there's a detail that took decades to notice. The skull has damage, puncture marks, and a specific pattern of scoring around the eye sockets. Researchers eventually compared it to the remains of monkeys killed by modern African crowned eagles, birds that hunt primates by striking from above, punching through the skull, and eating the brain and eyes. The marks match. The Taung child was not a hunter. The Taung child was lunch. And this is not an isolated case. Across the fossil record of our early relatives, you find the same story again and again. Bones in the dens of predators, bones with tooth marks, bones cracked in the way carnivores crack bones. For millions of years, our ancestors were medium-sized, slow, clawless, weak-jawed apes living in a landscape absolutely stuffed with things that ate apes. There's another South African site called Swartkrans, and it is the single best illustration of our old position in the food chain. Swartkrans is a cave system packed with fossils of early hominins, our relatives, walking upright, using simple tools. The obvious assumption for a long time was that this was a home, a shelter. Our ancestors lived in the cave. Then people looked more carefully at the bones. Many of them showed damage consistent with carnivore feeding, and one particular fossil, a piece of a hominin skull, has 2 neat holes in the back of it, spaced apart at exactly the distance of the lower canine teeth of a leopard. The cave wasn't our house, it was the pantry. Leopards drag their kills into sheltered spots to eat them undisturbed, and for a very long stretch of time, one of the things they were dragging in was us. Now hold that image and add the crucial detail. Leopards hunt at night. So do lions, more often than not. So do hyenas. So do most of the big cats that shared a landscape with our ancestors. Their eyes are built for it. They have a reflective layer behind the retina that bounces light back through it for a second pass, which is why animal eyes flash in a torch beam and yours don't. They owned the night. We didn't. Because here is the physical, unfixable problem. Human eyes are day equipment. Our retinas are unusually rich in the cells that handle color and fine detail, and those cells need a lot of light to work. That's an extraordinary trade. In daylight, human vision is superb. We can pick a ripe fruit out of a green canopy, read an expression across a clearing, spot a moving animal at distance. Almost nothing does daylight better than we do. The bill arrives at dusk. Color drains out first. Then detail. Within about 20 minutes of full darkness, your eyes have adapted as much as they're going to. And what you're left with is a smeared gray low-resolution version of the world with a blurry hole in the middle of your gaze. You have no reflective layer to amplify what light there is. Your night vision is, frankly, embarrassing for an animal that had predators. So think about what sunset actually meant for a couple of million years. It wasn't the end of the day. It was the moment your single greatest advantage switched off, while the abilities of everything that wanted to eat you switched on every night for 100,000 generations. If you had a lineage that felt relaxed about that, it isn't your lineage. It ended. The ancestors who made it through to become you were, without exception, the ones who got tense when the light went, which raises an awkward problem because we still had to sleep. Sleep is the most vulnerable thing an animal does. You stop scanning, you stop listening properly, you lie still in one place for hours. For a slow ape in leopard country, that should be close to suicidal. So how did we get away with it? Part of the answer is that we may never really have done it alone. Researchers studying the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania, tracked sleep across a group of adults sleeping in the open, night after night. They were looking for something specific. How often was every single person in the group asleep at the same time? The answer, across more than 200 hours of observation, was about 18 minutes total. For virtually the entire night, somebody in that group was awake, not on a rota, not by arrangement, just because people naturally drifted in and out at different times. Older members tended to wake earlier and sleep lighter. Younger ones stayed up later. That's sometimes called the sentinel hypothesis. The idea that a group of humans with varied sleep patterns is a group that is never fully unguarded. And it explains something that annoys millions of people today. If you're older and you wake at 4 in the morning and can't get back down, you're not broken. You're a night watchman with nothing left to watch. And then, somewhere along the line, we did something no other animal has ever done. We took the one thing every predator on Earth is afraid of, and we made it sit next to us. Evidence for controlled fire goes back a very long way. Burnt bone and ash deep inside caves like wonderwork in South Africa, in layers around 1 million years old, far enough from the entrance that lightning or a wildfire can't easily explain it. Think about what a fire does at night. It pushes back the dark in a circle around you. It makes you visible to each other and hides what's beyond the light from you. But crucially, big carnivores will not walk into that circle. Fire flips the arrangement. For the first time, there was a small patch of the night that belonged to us. And that patch did something to us. An anthropologist studying conversation among the Jew/Huansi in the Kalahari compared what people talked about in daylight versus what they talked about around the fire after dark. Daytime talk was overwhelmingly practical. Work, arrangements, complaints, who did what. Firelight talk was different. It went to stories, to people who weren't there, to the dead, to spirits, to distant relatives, to the imaginary. So the fire didn't just protect us from the night. It's arguably where storytelling was born, which means the same darkness that terrified us is also the reason we started inventing things to be terrified of. Now, let's go inside your skull, because all of this ancient machinery is still installed. When the light goes, the balance of power in your brain shifts. Threat detection structures deep in the middle of the brain, the amygdala chief among them, start weighting incoming signals more heavily, while the slow, reasoning parts of your frontal lobe lose their best evidence. Vision, your highest bandwidth sense, has essentially gone offline. Hearing takes over as the main channel, and hearing is terrible at telling you what something is. It only tells you that something is. That's why a specific noise at night is far less frightening than a vague one. A creak you can identify is nothing. A creak you can't identify is everything, and your brain resolves that ambiguity in a very particular direction for a reason that comes down to arithmetic. Imagine your ancestor hears a rustle. If they assume it's the wind and it's the wind, they saved a little energy. If they assume it's a predator and it's the wind, they lost a little sleep and looked silly. If they assume it's the wind and it's a leopard, they are dead. And every child they would ever have had is dead with them. Those outcomes are not symmetrical. False alarms are cheap. Missed alarms are final. Any system evolving under those rules will drift towards jumping at nothing, and it will keep drifting because there is no penalty severe enough to push it back. You are the descendant of the jumpy ones. Every single one of your ancestors, without a gap, was scared enough. Here's the piece of evidence that really seals it. If fear of the dark were just something we picked up from stories and films, it would show up wherever the scary stories are and be absent where they aren't. That's not the pattern. Fear of the dark appears in young children almost universally, across cultures, and it does so on a fairly reliable timetable. It's uncommon in infancy. It ramps up sharply in the toddler years, tends to peak somewhere in early childhood, and then usually fades through later childhood on its own, with no treatment, no explanation, no negotiation. That timing lines up suspiciously well with something else: the age at which a small human first becomes mobile enough to wander off, but is still far too small to survive anything. A 1-year-old can't get away from the group. A 4-year-old absolutely can. And a 4-year-old alone in the dark, 100,000 years ago, was gone. Psychologists talk about prepared fears, the ones we learn far too quickly and unlearn far too slowly, compared to genuinely dangerous modern things. It is remarkably hard to make a person instinctively terrified of an electrical socket or a car, both of which kill people constantly. It is remarkably easy to make a person terrified of a dark room, a snake, or a spider, which mostly don't. We are not calibrated for the world we built. We're calibrated for the one we left. For most of recorded history, ordinary people didn't fight the dark. They organized their lives around it. Historians who've dug through diaries, court records, medical texts, and literature from pre-industrial Europe have found something we'd almost completely forgotten. People routinely slept in 2 shifts. A first sleep beginning not long after dark, then a stretch of wakefulness in the deep middle of the night, an hour or so, sometimes more, and then a second sleep until dawn. And that gap between them was ordinary, unremarkable life. People prayed, talked quietly, tended fires, had sex, thought about their dreams. It was so normal that writers referred to it in passing, the way you'd mention lunch, without ever bothering to explain it. Night in that world was genuinely dangerous, and not because of leopards. It was the hour of thieves, fire, getting lost, drowning in a ditch. Cities imposed curfews, doors were barred. Going out after dark, in many places and periods, marked you as either desperate or up to something. The folklore matches. Virtually every culture on Earth has its catalog of night creatures, and if you line them up, they're strikingly repetitive. Things that come while you sleep, things at the edge of the firelight, things that take children who wander off. Different continents, different gods, same monster, over and over, because it isn't really a monster, it's a memory. Then, in the space of a single human lifetime, we ended it. Widespread electric lighting is roughly 140 years old. Before that, night was a wall you hit every evening. After that, it became a setting you could switch off. In evolutionary terms, this happened about 4 seconds ago. Our threat systems were shaped over millions of years by an environment that no longer exists, and there has been nowhere near enough time for anything to be rewritten. So the equipment is still running, with almost nothing left to do. It fires when you go down to the basement. It fires when the power cuts out. It fires when you're the last one awake in a quiet house. And it fires hardest in that specific window, in the early hours, when your body temperature is at its lowest and your defenses are thinnest, which, unhelpfully, is also exactly when people wake from the phase of sleep where the most vivid dreams happen. That's the 3 a.m. feeling. It isn't a premonition, and it isn't a haunting. It's an old alarm system, wired for a world of leopards and eagles and moonless plains, running its checks in a room where nothing has happened in years. And for a tiny fraction of people, it never dials down. A persistent, life-shaping fear of darkness with a proper name, nyctophobia. But for most of us, it stays where it is. Quiet, background, absurd, and completely unkillable. So, why are humans afraid of the dark? Because we're not, exactly. We're afraid of not knowing. And the dark is the purest version of not knowing there is, because our eyes are extraordinary daylight instruments and close to useless after sunset, while almost everything that hunted our ancestors was built the other way around, because the fossils are blunt about it. A child with eagle marks in his eye sockets, a skull with 2 leopard punctures in the back of it. We were prey, at night, for millions of years, because sleeping through that required a group where somebody was always awake. And some of us are still doing that shift, because fire gave us one small circle of safety. And in that circle, we started telling each other stories, which is how the dark got populated with monsters that were never really there. Because a brain that panics at nothing survives, and a brain that stays calm at the wrong moment doesn't get to have grandchildren. And because we turned the lights on 140 years ago, which is not remotely long enough to convince 3 million years of instinct that the room is empty, the dark isn't dangerous anymore. Your body just hasn't been told.